Okay, so before we get started with our entry one notes here, let's just pause and take a look at this. I want you to think about what that could be used for as it relates to the field of science. So have an idea in your mind, doesn't matter what you got, but actually what it's used for, this was the bark of a willow tree, is used for a long time in medicine, very similarly to aspirin. So as a pain reliever. So in entry one here, we're going to talk about the myth of science. And we're going to talk about chemistry a lot this year, obviously in chemistry. But chemistry is a study of matter and energy. So let's get into some general things and then focus back down into chemistry. So science is the knowledge that we gain by observing events in order to discover facts and ideas that we can test and develop over time. And science has many branches. We have our specifics to the biological sciences or living things, chemistry, matter and energy, earth science, things about the earth, atmosphere, and weather. But the idea here is that they all interact and overlap. And my hope this year is that we can look at all of the topics of chemistry and use them to help us understand things in our daily life. So in this first unit, we're going to look a lot at weather or things that you see during weather. So why science? What's the purpose here? Why do we do it? So again, science is what we get by observing and studying things to discover the nature or how they exist. And why do we do it? It helps us to understand how the world works around us, but it also allows us to develop different technologies. So technology, and you only have to write down what's in the red here. Your note should follow along with that. Is the application of science for practical purposes. So some scientists pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake, and some scientists and engineers apply science to be able to practically apply them. So example, the fact that we're all able to do learning this way came from the fact that people started to research different elements, different compounds, in combination, how electricity works, even what electricity is and how to generate it, and then they're able to build over time into some practical applications such as the iPad that you're holding. But let's get into the myth of science. So think of a scientist, and I just want you in your notes, no pressure, just pause here, write what you think of when you hear the word scientist. Write down what you think of in your notes. So I'll give you a second to do that. And pause. And some things that maybe came to mind were lab coats or computers or notebooks or the intelligence or chemistry experiments. And this relates to our names of scientists. So if I asked you to name some scientists, think of a first name that comes to your head. Maybe you think of Isaac Newton or Galileo or Einstein. Okay, and these three people, while scientists, perpetuate the myth that all scientists are just old white guys. When in fact, when we look at what science actually is, scientists that come from pretty much every single culture since the beginning of time has had some level of scientific development within it. You can find examples of that. So we're just going to look at a few. And you don't have to write down a lot of these. But let's talk about the reality is that science is everywhere and done by everyone in culture throughout history. You don't have to write that "you" at the end. But that's the idea here, is that every person, including you, engages in science in your daily life on a regular basis. And cultures in whole does. So, people from every culture have performed experiments, been curious about how the world works, and use those experimentations to explore the world around them. And some practical examples from astronomy. People all over the world were studying the night sky in order to develop calendars, make predictions about different aspects, as we'll see here in a minute. And when you look at this photo right here, you're probably like, what the heck is that? Yep, there's a museum that has Galileo's middle finger in it, so that's pretty cool. But the ancient Mayan civilization, they built stone structures that allowed them to view the movement of stars and planets. Okay, so their civilization was built along the lines of exploration and viewing of these different celestial occurrences. And their calendar is based off of that, right? So in the 3rd century, we had Aristarchus of Samos. He was able to predict the size of the Earth and Moon based on astronomical measurements he was making, which is super wild to think about. And the Chinese, they had a lot of different cultural beliefs that were developed based on stars and astronomy, such as when they observed solar eclipses, it was something that would allow them to produce the future health and success of emperors, and they had beliefs along with it. Agriculture, so today everything that we do and eat is based off of big business of agriculture, but one of the primary crops that we use today, corn, was developed by interbreeding of 2 different plants by Central Americans. Okay, so that's something that maybe we don't think about all the time. Or sorry, Central Mexicans, the ancient civilizations there. So that is early evidence of selective breeding to develop a crop. And in the Middle East, for thousands of years, they've studied and implemented irrigation, drainage, conservation, and sanitation. And they've dug wells and done those things to access water. And coming back to where we started, Native Americans, they were examples of people who used many different types of plants and other natural items to as forms of medicine. And you can still use willow bark to cure aches and pains, much like aspirin does, because of the compound that's in it. So this compound, salicylic acid, is a natural pain reducer, and maybe they didn't know what salicylic acid was, but they were able to, as a people, understand that it did have specific characteristics. So another stereotype that we have is that men are scientists and not women, but the reality is that many women have contributed very strongly to the field of science and technology, such as Marie Curie. She really pushed the development of radioactive elements, which helps us to understand the properties of those elements and what they can be used for. And that actually allowed someone like Rosalind Franklin, who is the first person to capture an image of the double helix of DNA, to do what she did. In 2600 BC, the first empress of China developed a mass production for silk, and Grace Murray Hooper, without her, we wouldn't have what we have today. She was able to develop something called a compiler, which translates English into telling your computer to do something. So without her, your iPad doesn't even exist. So science is everywhere. It's done by everyone, including yourself. If you see a light bulb that's out, you immediately go, okay, why isn't it working? Is it the switch or is it the light bulb? The first thing you do probably is switch out the light bulb. And if it still doesn't work, then you're like, okay, now it's something with the circuitry, right? So you're going through the process of experimentation. But a lot of times we just kind of blow through that in our everyday life in order to get to our results. So one thing to note, and I apologize for not saying this earlier, is that if at any time you need to pause the video, make sure you do that so you can take your notes. So this is your homework here that you're submitting with your assignment. You're going to finish these 5 sentence stems. The myth of science is blank, the reality is blank, and then you're going to give 2 examples of how diversity in science disproves this myth, and then maybe reflect on what you used to think and what you think now. And what you have there is fine. I'm just going to check for completion and accuracy when you turn it in. And that's your daily points. Take the notes and finish this. And then next you're going to go to the coloring periodic table. So open the video and download the PDF. Maybe watch the first minute of the video before you download the PDF so you know exactly what you're doing. And then go from there. All right, guys. Talk to you soon.